Hello, everyone, and welcome back to First on Fraud. I'm Sarah Frano, your fraud-fighting friend in the title industry, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend, First American's Senior Operations Counsel, Matt Sager. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Sarah. So good to join you again.
You want to play a game?
I am all in. I love games. Let's go.
Okay, it's word association. I'm going to say a word.
I'm a master.
Okay, I'm just going to say the word. You tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Ready.
FinCEN.
I give up. Not played anymore. Not a chance. This is supposed to be a family-friendly podcast, and I'm probably going to say words I shouldn't. So,
you know what? You and a lot of other people right now who have been gearing up for the new FinCEN regulation going into effect in 2026, maybe, hopefully, asterisk right there. For more stories behind the headlines, subscribe to First on Fraud and stay one step ahead of the issues that impact your transactions, your timelines, and your bottom line. Today on First on Fraud, we are joined by a very special guest with us today. He has spent his entire career tracking the flow of dirty money across the globe. John Cassara is a former CIA officer and a former special agent with the Treasury Department. And he's one of the very few people who has done both. He's considered the leading expert in anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. He frequently testifies before Congress and consults with our government and others on anti-money laundering measures. And during his career, not only did John do that, but he also worked for FinCEN. He also was a CIA spy, including being an undercover arms dealer and working in Italy combating the mafia, just to name a few of his accomplishments. Have I exhausted all of it yet? Because I don't think that I have. Your career is incredible.
Well, it wasn't planned; it just happened. but listening to you kind of review everything, I'm getting all these flashbacks. Yes, I think you pretty much captured it, though.
You didn't stop there. You've retired now from your government service, but you still are involved. You are the foremost authority that Congress relies on now for matters dealing with money laundering, threat finance, and transnational crime. You've testified before Congress numerous times, and you're a published author. When it comes to anti-money laundering, you have literally written the book on it, not just one, but 6.
Well, thank you. And the other thing I think that I continue to do is stir the pot. There are a lot of issues out there I keep trying to draw attention to. And I feel very passionate about this topic. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Well, you're here to explain to us how criminals use real estate to clean dirty money and money laundering, and what FinCEN's rules aim to stop and whether it actually can. Can you explain to us, just a baseline for the rest of us who haven't watched Ozark? How does money laundering work?
Sure. I'm going to start by asking Matt a question.
Oh, is it another word association game or?
Kind of. I mean, I got the idea. I got the idea earlier. So let me ask you a question. Why do criminal organizations do what they do? Why do they commit crime?
There's a lot of money to be had in it.
Exactly. Money, greed, avarice. We sometimes say it's one of the 7 deadly sins. It's part of the human condition. And basically, once criminals and criminal organizations start collecting a lot of money, they have to try to hide it, or they have to try to disguise it because they don't want people to know, the government to know, the origins of those illicit monies. Now, there are lots of different definitions of money laundering, but the one I use, it's the process of hiding or the disguising of the proceeds of any form of criminal activity. Because actually, outside of crimes of passion, for example, murder committed in a rage, criminals, as Matt said, they commit crime for money.
Well, don't make it sound like I'm involved with the criminals here, John. I mean, just because I know they make money doesn't mean I'm a criminal.
Well, we probably all have a little bit of greed in us, but criminals, particularly today, it seems it's to the excess. Now, all different forms of criminal activity are involved. We call those predicate offenses or specified unlawful activities to charge money laundering. The United States basically lists them off. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Things like customs fraud or narcotics trafficking or human trafficking or the diversion of high technology and weapons systems. All these types of things are predicates to charge money laundering. The international community, the Financial Action Task Force, some of your listeners may be aware of the FATF. They define money laundering and list basically, they call it all serious crimes can be used as predicates to charge money laundering. And this is something that's going to be becoming more and more attention. There's a lot of movement today, for example, to define tax evasion as money laundering. And some jurisdictions even call capital flight as money laundering.
What's capital flight?
It can be licit money or illicit, but it leaves one country and goes to another. For example, today, China leads the world in capital flight. There's a lot of, money, capital, leaving China and going to other areas in the world. So they call that capital flight, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it is licit money. The problem is that sometimes licit or illicit is mixed up with the licit. It's mixed, or we call commingled, and then the whole thing is tainted, which we can talk about later on when we get specific about property and investments, because we need to know the source of the funding that's used to buy the properties.
Criminals, they're making money off of their crimes, and they need to, we always hear about this. They need to wash the money. They need to clean it. And that's the whole thing with the money laundering. So tell us how money laundering works. Like, what do they do to make it clean?
I'm going to answer that question, but before I do that, I want to give everybody an idea of the magnitude of the problem. And this is why it's so important, because the magnitude is just incredible. First of all, I have to say, we don't know for certain. We've been looking at this problem for 30 plus years. By very definition, laundering is opaque, it's hidden. So we don't have specific concrete numbers to work with. But we seem to fall back to an old IMF, International Monetary Fund estimate of a number of years ago, where they think that dirty money, illicit money, money that's laundered represents about 2 to 5% of world GDP.
Wow.
It's very rough numbers. I use the estimate of about $4 trillion a year.
That's bigger than some countries' GDP.
Oh, far bigger.
Easy. Wow.
$4 trillion a year.
Wow.
And again, it depends on what's included in the count. If you included, for example, tax evasion, that number would obviously double, and other things as well. But $4 trillion, how much goes on in the United States? Again, the numbers are all over the place. The government's changed those numbers over the years. The conservatives estimates in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Personally, I say it's well over $1 trillion a year. The bottom line is it's incredible, and the problem is getting worse, okay? So that's the magnitude. Now, how do we look at it? How do we examine it? Both the intelligence community and the law enforcement community basically recognize 3 stages or phases for money laundering: placement, layering, and integration. The first one is placement. Easy example is narcotics sales in the United States. Roughly about $100 billion plus a year. $100 billion plus translates to 20 million pounds of currency. 20 million pounds of currency. $20 bills, $100 bills, $10 bills collected on the street corners of the United States around the country. So they have a logistics problem. So what they try to do, and it's placing it into a bank, a financial institution, a non-bank financial institution, perhaps even a money service business. They do that in a wide variety of means, but most commonly they break it down into smaller amounts. They smurf it, They use runners, mules, call it what you will.
What's a
Wait, yeah,
what's
go
smurfing?
back to this Smurf.
Smurfing.
That's
Okay.
you're ruining my
maybe-
childhood with that,
Okay,
John.
that's exactly what I'm going to say. So go back to your childhood. I think it was a French cartoon, those little blue men running
Yes.
around over the place. That's the origin of the name smurfing, because they take these
Little
people,
amounts.
these little mules, runners, whatever. They take little amounts and they go to this bank, this MSB, that MSB, money service business, and they get it into the system. They place it, hopefully for them, in ways that do not trigger financial transparency reporting requirements. We'll talk about that. Financial intelligence, right?
Mhm.
So after it's placed, they layer it. They try to make it very difficult for the good guys to follow the money trail, the value trail. So the easiest way I can describe that is they wire it from one bank to another, from one account to another, from one offshore to another, to a bank secrecy haven, to an LLC that doesn't have beneficial ownership information, from one jurisdiction where it's very, very difficult to get cooperation, making it very, very difficult, layering it to follow the money trail. And then finally, after it's placed and layered, they integrate it back into the economy. They buy up those fancy cars, boats, and airplanes you used to see in Miami Vice and some of the Hollywood films. They'll invest in the stock market. They'll buy property.
Now you just mentioned, boats, fancy cars, and that's really, in my mind, when I'm thinking about money laundering, is this very Hollywood-esque, glamorous side to it. And, I guess I'm curious, is that always the case? Because you're talking about huge dollars and, you're thinking of mega mansions, but money laundering isn't always necessarily that huge, right? I mean, this happens on smaller scales, not necessarily mansions, but maybe it's, condos or, smaller local money laundering, not necessarily huge mafia or cartel mega operations, right?
Big versus small, or local versus international. I think the answer is yes, 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 and yes, meaning they use everything.
Everything.
It can be very small, localized, and it can be absolutely transnational in scope, and everything in between. There's not one way, there's not a favorite way. They use everything.
How's crypto coming into play now, and any type of, electronic forms of payments or coins, and how that complicates things? But you said they still prefer the old-fashioned ways.
Cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and others, it's sexy. It's getting a lot of attention, and it's becoming increasingly popular with money launderers. They use it in all sorts of criminal activities, particularly things, like e-commerce crime, et cetera, et cetera. They all want payment now in cryptocurrencies. If you look at the numbers involved with money laundering, they still use the old-fashioned ways. The three largest methodologies of money laundering, as one, through financial institutions, two, through bulk cash smuggling, literally taking the proceeds of, say, narcotics, that $100 billion that we talked about earlier in the United States, the proceeds of drug sales, and then transporting it across the border, for example, into another country. Smuggle bulk cash. Just like you smuggle drugs into a country, you smuggle the cash, the proceeds, out of a country. And then finally, it's trade-based money laundering, something that I have been very, very interested in throughout my career, which is basically using commodities, trade, to transfer value. A lot of this is done via customs fraud, over and under invoicing, basically to launder money and to transfer value. Those are the big three. And we, meaning kind of law enforcement in general, that's what we're getting killed by. So the criminals continue to use these big three until we can demonstrate that they're no longer able to do so. Yeah, they're reaching out and they're doing other things, as we say in law enforcement, again, it's only limited by the criminal's imagination, and they do some very creative things. But I still encourage the U.S. government and the international community to concentrate on the big three through banks, bulk cash smuggling, and trade-based.
So focus on the old fashioned.
The I'm all into old fashioned. Yes.
So yeah, do you see? Is it going to continue that way, focusing on those old three, or with the advent of new technologies, do you see this changing where they may get a little more creative? And if so, what creative avenues should we be on the lookout for?
Yes, they're going to be more creative. And I think what's happening too, for example, is there's a mix of the old and the new. For example, many of your listeners may be familiar with things like Hawala. It was featured prominently after 9/11, kind of an informal way of laundering money that's been around literally for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The Chinese have the basic same type of system called Fai Qian, or flying money. It involves basically money transfer without money movement. You give money to a broker in one destination, and you want that money delivered to another individual in another destination, another country. The money doesn't actually move from point A to point B. It's out already in point B. It's paid out. So you've got brokers in two different areas. They have to settle accounts or balance the books over time, because somebody's running a surplus, somebody's running a deficit, so they have to settle up. So historically and culturally, they used trade-based value transfers. In the old days, back in the Renaissance era, I mean, it could have been literally anything. It could have been trade in garments and textiles, or copper, or iron ore, or whatever it is. Today, it's often things like electronics and aviation equipment and all different kinds of things. Again, a lot of this involves over and under invoicing. But to answer your question, Matt, what we're seeing now is they're basically using 21st century techniques. They're using things like cryptocurrency. They're using things like phone apps and whatnot in these old-fashioned systems, money laundering systems like a Hawala or a flying money. Had a very interesting discussion shortly after 9/11. And it was with a Pakistani individual who was very involved with the gray markets. And
What's the gray markets? Hold
gray
on.
market. So
What's that?
Gray markets are somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's not legitimate. It's kind of right on in that zone where it could be considered legal or illegal. It's right there in the middle. It's gray. It's not black. It's not white. It's in the middle.
I think you're describing my wife's side business, John.
Somewhere in the middle there, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we were talking about things kind of we're going to be talking about today. We were talking about trade-based money laundering. We were talking about invoice fraud and manipulation. We were talking about countervaluation, balancing the books through fictitious value transfer, this type of thing. We were talking about Hawala. And he looks at me and he says, "Mr. John, don't you realize that your enemies are laughing at you? They are laundering money right under your noses, but the West doesn't see it. Your enemies are laughing at you." So, I mean, I was extremely concerned because I knew he was right, particularly in 2002, 2003, right after 9/11. I was absolutely aware we were looking in many of the wrong places to stop threat finance. I was more concerned about underground methods, things that our adversaries used. For example, the misuse of the international gold trade, or Hawala, or trade-based money laundering, because we were set up to use financial intelligence. We wanted to fight the war on terror by using the weapons that were available to us to fight the war on drugs, and it wasn't going to work. And the bad guys, whether they be terrorists, whether they be oligarchs today, whether they be organized crime families or whatever, they know our countermeasures and they're very adept at going around them.
When you said it's right underneath your nose, like, is it one of those things where it's hiding in plain sight, the money laundering? What type of things are in plain sight that, we don't see necessarily as money laundering, but in fact is all part of it?
I think the easiest example again is trade-based money laundering. There's so much trade, going on in the world. China, for example, is the largest trading nation in the world. U.S. trade is so important. We have, all this stuff going in and all this stuff going out, and it's customs, for example, can inspect, if we're lucky, maybe 2 to 3, 4% of all the incoming containers, and outgoing it's far less than that. So it's very easy to either hide things in these shipments of goods, these commodities that go in and out, or to mislabel them, misinvoice them. And it's very, very difficult. For example, if you have a shipment of soybeans and or a shipment of gold or a shipment of helicopter spare parts, whatever it is, and you you declare it as, I don't know, $2 million. Well, is it really $2 million, or is it 2 million 5, or is it 1 million, or whatever it is? This is a kind of value transfer through invoice manipulation. It's fraud that's very, very difficult to pick up.
So in listening to one of your congressional hearings, somebody else was talking about this very thing and how they're blending technology with the commodities and the goods and services. And the example was fentanyl, and selling the fentanyl and having $1 million in cash, and having that cash sitting in an apartment in a US city. And then that money gets put up for auction in a app, and people outside of the US bid on that money. Could you explain a little bit of that? Because I think it really illustrates exactly what you're talking about.
For example, there's a lot of capital flight coming from Asia into the United States, but there's a lot of restrictions on that capital as well. China, they limit their citizenry to about $50,000 equivalent US to take out of the country per person per year. All right. But say, for example, you've got an Asian that wants to educate his son or daughter in the United States, an Asian that wants to invest in the United States, an Asian that wants to buy property here in the United States, far in excess of $50,000. And there are ways that they get around that, okay? There are a lot of ways they get around, and I've written about this, but I'm not going to get into the details now. But one of the primary ways they get around this is that through these, in effect, auctions that you mentioned, right? Say the proceeds of crime that's already here in the United States. The money is here.
Right.
So they, in effect, buy this dirty currency, right? And use that to invest in their properties, to pay for their children's education, to invest in a business or whatever it is. And then the currency swap, if you will, continues with money being credited, say, back in that other country, in China, for example, or wherever else. And that again is extremely difficult for law enforcement to follow, because for the most part, it goes around our primary money laundering countermeasures, which is financial intelligence.
So, John, can you describe to us, what financial intelligence is and how we use it and how we, track this type of crime?
That's a very important question, and it's something that I think your listener is going to be interested in the sense of why are we reporting this stuff now? Why are we generating this information that's going to go into FinCEN? So believe it or not, it goes back to about 1970 when Richard Nixon declared war on drugs. And I mean, I certainly remember that. I'm old enough to remember it. And when he did that, Congress started passing a series of laws, rules, and regulations, collectively known as the Bank Secrecy Act. And bank secrecy is actually a misnomer. Think of financial transparency.
So say, doesn't it mean there were no secrets in banking anymore?
Yeah, yes. Financial transparency. So what they did was, for example, they created all these requirements. So most of your listeners are aware of this. If you go into a bank and you deposit or withdraw $10,000 or more of cash, you certainly can. They're just going to fill a report out on you.
The CTR.
It's a currency transaction report. Yeah. There's a FinCEN name for it now, but let's use the old-fashioned names. A currency transaction report.
I guess he just called me old-fashioned. I love it. Sorry, John.
And the Smurfs, right? The Smurfs
And
would go. The Smurfs would go $9.99.9, right? They want to get
Yes,
right under that
except-
10.
Yeah, they do that. A lot of dumb Smurfs do that, but there are a lot of very sophisticated software programs now that banks have that will
catch
alert
that.
on that kind of thing. If you go travel in and out of the country and you're transporting $10,000 more of cash or a monetary instrument, you also have to fill out a form. You're certainly allowed to take money out. You're allowed to bring money in. You just have to fill out a form. The old IRS 8300 form. If you buy a car, a brand new Mercedes, and you pay cash, the dealership will take your money, right? But you have to fill out a form, okay? Anything over a $10,000 purchase. Same thing with real estate. You've got to fill out a form, an 8300 form. There are other types of financial intelligence as well. The most important started about 1996 in the United States, the Suspicious Activity Report, a SAR. So the reason why this is important is that bankers, we say, are the first line of defense for money laundering, right? They're supposed to, quote unquote, know your customer. So let's say Matt, right? His bank, I don't know, it's Bank of America, right? And they know you. They know your history of deposits and withdrawals.
Mostly withdrawals.
Mostly withdrawals.
I need my blackjack money.
They know what's normal for you and what's atypical. You go into your bank, Bank of America branch one day, and you bring in a suitcase full of cash, $500,000 approximate, right? And you deposit it. And 2 days later, you walk into that same branch and you say, I want to transfer it out to Dubai. And they'll say, this isn't the Matt I know. This is highly unusual. This is suspicious. I'm going to write a report on you. So they do. They write a suspicious activity report. The great thing about this report for law enforcement is that in addition to all the identifying information that it has, the compliance officer in the bank is going to write a narrative description about why this activity is suspicious. It may just be a couple sentences, a couple paragraphs. Some of them go on for pages, but it's really, really good information, good intelligence for law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level to see what is suspicious activity and hopefully use this information to help an investigation to make a case. So getting back to FinCEN, today there are approximately 25 million pieces of financial intelligence that file with FinCEN every year.
John, that's a lot. I mean, data is the new bacon. We all know that, but that's a lot of data for any organization, government, it doesn't matter, to pour through. That's a lot of pieces of individual paper and information. What happens to all of that?
What can be done with that information?
Yeah, that's just it. It's warehoused at FinCEN. It's warehoused, it's examined, some of it's examined, and then hopefully law enforcement, some of it's disseminated and law enforcement can draw on it. But this goes back to the creation of FinCEN.
Yeah, tell us, you were there. Tell us the history of FinCEN and how it got started, so we all know what we're doing here today.
As I was at Customs headquarters about 1989, 1990, when FinCEN first got off the ground. And it was literally one of the most altruistic things I ever saw happen in my U.S. government career. Because what happened is, again, this financial intelligence that the U.S. Treasury had, primarily the IRS and the U.S. Customs Service had, we realized how important it was for law enforcement to help make their cases. But we didn't want to silo it or stovepipe it, right? We wanted to disseminate it to other entities in the federal government, for example, the FBI, the DEA. We actually wanted to share this information with federal, state, local law enforcement. Even foreign entities, if we were working joint cases, needed to have some of this information. So the idea was to create this FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a small little, today it's a bureau within Treasury, okay, that would take in this financial intelligence, it would analyze it, it would add value to it. Add value meaning it would take in, say, commercially available information, or it would have access to law enforcement databases. It would add value to it. And then it would disseminate it to law enforcement. This is suspicious. Take a look at it. Here's a target package in your geographic area. Take a look at it. Or there'd be reactive requests. For example, there might be a DEA special agent in South Florida say, do you have any information, FinCEN, on John Doe and his company, the XYZ Corporation? So then they would the analysts would query the databases, see if there was anything in there, and then send it back to them. So that was the original mission of FinCEN, was to support law enforcement in their investigations. And it worked okay. I could give you more of the gory inside baseball information.
So with all this data collection we're getting and this information, it sounds like we're enhancing the financial intelligence and the access to this information, or what's really the purpose of this new rule and the collection of all this immense amount of data that we're going to be collecting?
The purpose of the new rule, as I understand it, is because about roughly 30% of real estate purchases in the United States today are primarily cash, right? They do not go through financial institutions. Suspicious activity reports are not filed by, for example, banks that are dealing with the financing. So what they're trying to do is to cover that kind of that missing zone, if you will, and have, trust companies and whatnot actually file the SARs. And hopefully that will then generate information, intelligence that can be passed on to law enforcement to help them, in effect, make cases dealing with the real estate sector.
Well, thank you. And I think what we also need to establish is what this new rule is, and what we're going to be seeing is, because it's going to be coming out soon, that any transfer of property that's not financed is going to have to be reported. And there's a cascade of who has to report it.
Right.
And the first person who has to report it is the settlement agent, person identified on the settlement statement. And so they're going to be collecting that data and obtaining it from the buyer and sharing that with FinCEN. So that's that new rule that's coming out. All transfers of property that are not financed.
I think you covered it very well.
So that's it for part one of FinSinners, but we are just getting started. John is joining us again for a part two to reveal how criminals hide dirty money in real estate, and where they like to hide it might surprise you. But here at First American, we've got you covered. So when it comes to FinCEN, we've got a quick reference guide just for you. Click in the show notes below or email us at firstonfraud@firstam.com to get your copy. But come back here for part two, where we uncover how FinSinners dirty up our real estate. This episode is copyright 2025 by First American Financial Corporation, all rights reserved.